came back this week to carry on the discussion, and I'm thrilled that the discussion is taking place also on the LinkedIn group. We're getting some really good ideas. And in fact, a couple of the questions that were asked last week caused me to step back and rethink one of the steps in the process and one of the tasks that we need to take care of at the two on-site events. So let me say thank you again for all your ideas and input. And this week we're going to talk about product, services, outputs, outcomes. In other words, what would the center do for its stakeholders? So last week I presented some questions on best practice models and lessons learned. Again, we got some really good feedback on that. What we're seeing in terms of a vision is that this center is going to be largely a networking hub for people, a connection among people who are already working in the field, people who have experience in areas, and people who want to learn from others. So this week we want to hear from you what kinds of products and services the center would either help you to create or provide for you, etc. So we've already had some really good suggestions, and we've got those captured. The question that I would pose this week, though, is how do we approach this question so that we hear from all of the stakeholder community? And I think Rosemary Dumont's question last week about who are the communities and how do we talk to them caused me to step back and think about, do we really understand who these stakeholders are? Do we have the right stakeholders? Are they complex communities, or are they a single entity? Last week, Richard Detch also raised this question in his idea of the audience targeting and profiling. And he posted the book on the Mickey Mouse Club audience. I think this was a really good idea because we were making some assumptions about who the stakeholder groups were and what they might need or want. And that may be, our perceptions may be wrong, our assumptions may be wrong. So we're likely to see each of these stakeholder groups as a single entity if we look at them from an academic perspective. So we need to change that view. And I'm wondering what you all think about at the summit, whether we ask the working groups to first take as a first task just a general sketch of who is in this, who's in their community, who's in their stakeholder group, so that we start with a really good understanding of who our community at the center might be. What do you all think about that?
Edwin Morrison.
Go ahead, Edwin.
The identification, as you're saying, and the, I guess, building the taxonomy of the audience served by this intent and purpose, I think that having the breakout sessions or the work sessions help define the structure of those served would make sense, because you're going to have those folks at the table. And then just know that it will morph and change and adapt to the reality as it builds.
I agree. And I think this may be one of the classic mistakes that institutes make, or centers make when they start out. They assume they know who they're serving. And really, they're probably constraining the participation in the community by doing that. So what do others of you think?
This is Mary Ann. I agree with you. I think it's a great idea to try to get some kind of a profile or a cross-section of profiles of the types of stakeholders, participants you have. And I guess I would enrich that even further, because I think what we're really talking about is trying to serve the needs of stakeholders based on labeling them as being a certain group, and so the next level down that I think might be interesting is to think in terms of what are the things that you're going to do differently for different types of groups, and maybe try to tease some of that out of these stakeholders too, because, for example, we might assume that a certain category of stakeholder is going to be very self-initiating in their participation, and in fact, in practice, it might be the other way around. So I'm wondering if we can ask some kinds of cagey questions, would you prefer, or give them some kind of a sentiment survey to say, would you prefer to do this or that, to kind of build up some of that how, not just the who's, but the how, because we might not be completely accurate in what hows think go with the who's. I hope that made sense.
It made perfect sense to me, and one of the other assumptions I think we're making when we say we want to be a networking hub is that all of the communities we might be trying to support may not have the same level of connectivity, or the same level, they may not be enabled technology-wise in the same way. So I was thinking back to, and Mary, as you were just talking, I had been thinking earlier about asking them to develop kind of a persona. I don't know if you're familiar with this approach we do in enterprise architecture, where we model some typical groups and then try to understand their environment, their needs, et cetera, and we put it on a one page, so it's really easy for everybody to see. But it addresses the technology environment, who their community is, how they generally communicate. And based on what you're saying now, I'm thinking we ought to send something like that to every person who's coming to the summit or is going to be participating virtually. So maybe we actually have that to work with before we even get together.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea, because I think what we even see in an individual organization, there can be a spectrum of personas there. Like some companies use this kind of persona profiling, and they equip those individuals differently, so that their technical capability is not even across the entire organization. So it actually gets down all the way to an individual person. I mean, you can talk in some generalities about the group as a whole, but the specific individual who's going to be interacting from that particular organization themselves might, deviate from the quote-unquote norm. So giving people the opportunity to profile themselves and what their interaction style is, and things along that line, I think might be helpful.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Denise, there's comments flowing in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Jake, do you want to, can I ask you? Or let me, I'll just log on to chat, since this is, okay. Give me just a minute to catch up. Miriam, I think that's a good comment. If we at least allow people to put out their, their profile, we might find that that communities of practice will evolve naturally within the stakeholders. So, but we would need to at least let other people know if they want to connect with somebody, what the best way to do that is. There are some issues, that's true. I think within the KM community, we would have some natural leaders stepping up, but we would also have to, well, we can support the COP, any COPs that develop. In fact, one of the things that we recently talked to the federal sector about is the KMWG group will be eventually going offline. And they have asked us to, if Kent State, and in particular the Knowledge Sciences Center, can step up and offer a home to a public sector community of practice that would be open and would, in particular, bring in local, state, public sector folks to engage in the dialogue around KM, but also to host the KMWG archive. So it could be that we can, that this is one of the services we could provide, is just open platforms for communities of practice that want to form for however long they want to form. Miriam, go ahead, please, and just add your comments directly. Just speak. Okay, so Miriam's comment is she would envision a model where there are distributed focus groups based on interests and needs with designated leaders who are selected or volunteer, and then they come together as larger groups when needed, etc. Okay, so she's got a group that's, oh, she doesn't have audio. I apologize. Exactly. So I think the COP model that is definitely one that we can support. So that's clearly one that we would have to set up some governance rules around to make sure that everyone is, you know, has an equal voice. It might actually help us to spread the word on what a COP is and how it functions. Excellent. Okay. So we've got at least one more idea. Okay. And I think along that same line, and this is following up with Rosemary's suggestion last week, we're going to have to learn how to talk with, or listen more, perhaps more importantly, we're going to have to learn how to listen to each of these different stakeholder groups. So I think we have kind of an agreement that that our task number one is to make sure we have a good understanding of who these stakeholder groups are. And I agree with Edwin that this is going to grow. And you know, if we can move this understanding along, this could be a tremendous boost to the field of knowledge management, because we're extending the model of who's involved in KM. Okay. So just remembering our 5 stakeholder groups, I think one thing we have to do is to define these, find out if the boundaries that we've developed or we've drawn are real. It could be that what I've called civil society needs to break out a little bit more. I had included public sector in business and industry because they're not a capital V, but they're a lowercase v. So my characterization might have been wrong.
Denise.
Yes.
Question. Where do you see public schools fitting into this?
You know, I put them in the academy because I think we need to extend KM. It can't just be in graduate school. We end up having to re-educate folks when they get to when they get out into the real world of work, because they've been taught how to behave in an industrial era rather than in a knowledge era.
Well, That's why I asked, because I could see it falling more into civil society as a local, regional capacity builder for society, as in public schools, grade schools, that sort of thing.
And you know, something else we should probably be prepared for is once we do these persona or profiles, we may need to come back and just get rid of our 5 stakeholder groups and redefine them entirely based on affinities among the persona.
And the other thing I've noticed, where would nonprofits fit? Would that be civil society also?
That's where I was putting them, yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, the whole point of these webinars is for you to tell me a better way to think about things or a better way to approach this thing. Make suggestions that, you know, either in the webinars or on the...
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. This is Ed Hawes. How do you distinguish business and industry from technology and R&D?
That's a good point. It's a good question. The reason that I distinguish them is because I think, especially in the knowledge sciences domain, they have a particular set of risks and challenges that are almost, from my perspective, are worthy of singling out and providing support to. In the current economic climate, it is very costly to develop the kinds of sophisticated knowledge technologies and the semantic technologies that we need for the 21st century. And it seems to me that the center could provide some support in terms of at least providing an environment where products could be tested. You know, we could kick tires, we can provide proof of concepts, you know, anything that helps lower the risk for these, the R&D folks. And also I think we need to, it's perhaps an overlap between the academy and technology R&D, but I think we need to be training more students to work with the sophisticated technologies that are out there. I think organizations have to pick up a lot of that, and they don't have that slack in time or resources. So when we teach a semantic analysis course, we say that our students are work ready the day that they come into the organization. You can hire them, and they'll know how to analyze your needs, pick the right technology, and then make it a success for everybody.
Yeah, I'm still having difficulty with that, I guess. You know, because you can have, business can have its, you know, can have a technological division, R&D division, and
right.
So can industry. So, you know, I'm having a difficult time separating these two, really, by how they're described on this, you know, Venn diagram. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, and it's a question I've struggled with too.
Yeah, and back to the, you know, where would you put the nonprofits? I would not put them with the academy necessarily. I would put them where, you know, in the area of science or research, you know, that they're working in.
Right.
Because you can have nonprofits in in research and development.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, so, you know, I think the nonprofit distribution depends upon what they're doing.
What if we?
Nonprofits are not necessarily all going to be, you know, their primary purpose isn't going to be education or knowledge sharing.
I'm just going to make one change here. So what if this group was called R&D?
Mm-hmm.
And then
this is Sandra. I got one kind of comment about that, because that was one of the divisions I did actually get between business and industry and technology R&D. I come from what's probably the business and industry area. I'm an enterprise company. We don't create the knowledge sciences technology, we use it. So we would have to decide, if we were going to, bring in an ontology tool, for example, or a knowledge management tool.
Yeah. You're making an assumption that technology and R&D, has ontology knowledge to begin with?
Well, what I'm saying is that technology area is where they're creating, I'm probably taking too much of a tools focus on it, but I see that that's the people, who are creating the tools that we in the enterprise would use for our knowledge management platforms.
Right.
That's kind of, when I looked at it, that's what I thought. And that may not be what it was meant to be, but that's what clicked with me, the differences.
I have two comments to add. The one being, I think there is some difference, some key differences between the for-profit and the not-for-profit. I think, especially in terms of the rules of engagement for them. I mean, I think the not-for-profits, we are much less constrained in how we can share because we exist for public service. Whereas the profits, they're much more locked down sometimes with what they can even share in a venue like this. And I'm not exactly sure how to factor that into the model, or if it's something that you would tease out as a differentiation within that stakeholder group. And the second comment that I was going to make, I think this idea that percolated up about there's the ones who create the technology and then there's the ones who use it. And I think a really valuable purpose for this group is bringing those two together, because the technology / tool generators are out here building what they think we need, and we are kind of at their mercy sometimes. They're throwing tools out at us, and we're trying to figure out how to cobble those tools together to do what we need. And I'm thinking this might be a good venue for that conversation to go in the opposite direction, for us to being able to have that opportunity to talk to vendors, to talk to technology developers, so that they have a better appreciation of where we need them to be moving, what direction, what's the next big tool on the horizon for us that maybe we can have some influence on that instead of just sitting back and waiting to see what comes.
Mary, I'm sorry, this is Kate too. Just wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that a lot of times the technology creators are for-profit organizations. They are their own business. They are not, they don't develop all the programs to give it to you. They develop it as a business, and if they don't make money, they fail. It's just like for any other for-profit organization.
Mm-hmm.
And added, that's a really good point, because every year I give my students in the semantic analysis course a first assignment, which is Mills Davis has a list that he maintains of semantic technology vendors. And each year I give them the list and ask them to please check to see how many of those vendors are still in existence. And every year we lose at least 30% of them. So if there's something that we can do in this kind of a community of practice to help them survive and to lower their risk, I think I would consider this center a success just in that particular. Yeah. How
many new ones occur or are added to the list every year?
That would Mills is going to be one of our keynote speakers, so that would be a question for him. I actually haven't done that, but
okay.
I would say probably fewer in this current economic climate.
Right. Fewer than are lost.
Right, right.
Hey, Denise, this is Kate. I'm sorry I had trouble with my sound system here, but I wonder if we might consider, I don't like going above 5, it already is complex enough, but consider splitting technology creators and users into knowledge consultants and knowledge product entrepreneurs. I just published an article with the ARC group with Glynis Thomas, and we actually did research just interviewing a whole bunch of different knowledge practitioners, and we cleanly came to about 3 categories. So you've got your knowledge, embedded knowledge leader, your knowledge consultant, and your knowledge product entrepreneurs or leaders. And I think everybody on the left, and even the labor force to a degree, I have to come back and understand that better, but the academy, well, let's put academy on the side, but not-for-profit and for-profit organizations could be embedded KMers, but it seems to me that the consultants and the product entrepreneurs could be very separate. There's a different kind of role that they play, both as advocates and creators.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Kate. The one thing is that I'm not sure that the center wants to be in the business of supporting consulting. I think we can be a network, a networking hub for helping people to identify consultants, but I think just in my personal view right now, we're a little bit top-heavy with consultants in the KM field. This is just, I tell my students whenever I'm expressing a personal opinion, my left hand goes up. So my left hand is up, high and waving right now. But I think we need to have just, if we could start out at the center with more engagement of sort of everyday people learning from one another. I think, was it Mary who made this point last week, that there are so many people out there who are doing really great stuff in this area. If we can just surface those people and start making the connections. Mm-hmm. So, and the other effort I'm going to point out to everybody, because, and this is not related to the Knowledge Sciences Symposium, is there will be a call for participation coming out from AIM. I believe it's coming out this week. AIM has agreed to take up the task, because they're a standard-setting body. They're going to convene 4 committees to work on standards for individuals, organizations, and education programs. So I think some of those kinds of things I'd like to push over to AIM and leave the center more as sort of an open forum. But to your point of connecting, providing a forum for connecting people, you know, if somebody is undertaking a big community of practice initiative and they want to find the thought leaders in the field, we should definitely, you know, a center like this in every state should be a place they go to look for those people.
Mm-hmm. This is
sorry, Denise, just to close out the last thing that we did, do you think we could take the word consulting out of technology creators and users and maybe somewhere put consultants as like a smiley face on the side and say that they might be agents of change or influencers or something? They're still going to be friends of ours, because many of our friends go back and forth between embedded and consultant roles.
Exactly. And we would expect to have, frankly, we would expect to have consultants engaging in every one of these, not just in the technology creators and users group. Yeah, you're right.
Denise?
You bet. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
This is Edwin.
Go ahead.
So the dialogue so far has been around hanging terms on what? And after listening and looking at this, does it make sense in a hierarchical schema to have, instead of what they are,
what they want?
Who they, right, users, producers, innovators, and just have simple, general, umbrella concepts of the type of usage of knowledge and then have the subparts or the lower classifications pick out the identifiers. And all that can be built right off the profile data sets.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. Edwin, please feel free to come up with a counter proposal here, and if you wouldn't mind posting it on the LinkedIn group. Yep. And if anybody, I've got a standard persona template that we used at the World Bank, which I'm happy to share, but you know, if anybody's got one that's better, please. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, this is Ed again. I just have a question. Do you have global participation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's my impression that I think, you know, there's some countries that are ahead of the U.S.
Oh, yes, definitely.
In semantic science.
Absolutely. And I think there are some countries, in fact, at this point, I'd say most countries are ahead of the U.S. in terms of the academy. When I look to my my peers in terms of who's got a rich knowledge management program, I'm looking at Colombia, I'm looking at Germany, I'm looking at Singapore. You know, we seem to be losing KM programs month by month. So I think now that I was chatting with a colleague of mine at the World Bank on Monday, because many of the ideas for the center are coming from my experience working with him over the last 15 years. But his idea of global expert teams.
Yes.
You know, if somebody's got, you know, as AstraZeneca, you want to look at data mining of pharmaceutical. You know, bring that question to the center, and we identify people, and then you tell us what kind of an effort you want us to support. Do you want a closed community that you can work in? And, you know, how are you going to characterize the solution when it's finished? Is it going to be shared intellectual property? And the center promote it? You know.
Does Google or Microsoft or IBM, are you planning to get them involved, or do they have nonprofit? They must have some nonprofit branches. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. HP, Google, all of them have research labs or academic outreach programs. Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
And I've got a list of technology vendors that we're contacting, but if you have contacts that you would like us to work with, please let us know.
Well, I would like to get a list, if you could publish this on the LinkedIn, or of nonprofit semantic companies. You know.
Let me ask. Mills is on the community, so let me ask him to post that. I don't know if you all have seen his semantic wave report.
No.
It's a really good report. I'll post the link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
He also has a wonderful landscape poster of the semantic environment, which is, from my perspective, the best one out there, because he sees semantics in every part of technology. So when you talk about semantic search, it's not just linked data.
Yep.
It's deep semantics, and every aspect of a search architecture can be enhanced with semantics. So yeah, we were lucky to get him as a keynote speaker.
Oh, cool.
All right. So I have something to do. I'm going to post that link.
Okay.
And we'll ask Neil to give us an update. All right, so we're going to keep this stakeholder model a little loose until we start looking at persona and what some of the characteristics of that are. In fact, we may totally redefine this by the time we get to the Ohio event. Good. Okay, so I think we probably talked through the rest of my slides here. The other thing that I wanted to, the other question that came up last week that I wanted to try to frame at least, I think it may have been Rosemary who asked this as well, which is, what do we mean by knowledge sciences? And there's, over the 20 years that I've been engaged in knowledge management, I have seen people get stuck on defining knowledge and defining KM, and I want us to avoid that. So my favorite focus is what's the goal of knowledge management, because it applies to anybody in any group, any organization, and that's from Bollinger and Smith. The objective of knowledge management is to make the organization act as intelligently as possible and to realize the best value from its knowledge assets. In other words, to create a learning organization that's capable of measuring, storing, and capitalizing on the expertise of employees to create an organization that's more than the sum of its parts. I think you could change some of the words there and it would apply to any of those stakeholder groups. So at Kent, this is how we identify and define KM. We look at it in terms of 10 facets and a competency wheel. So knowledge, leadership, and strategy, organizational culture and semantics, communities and collaboration, intellectual capital, management, and also the knowledge economy, knowledge operations, that embedded knowledge concept we were talking about, knowledge technologies, knowledge architecture, which is a little bit different in the 21st century than knowledge technologies, the traditional focus of KM programs, which is knowledge asset management, organizational learning, and knowledge assessment and evaluation. So any of these aspects of KM, we would be prepared to and consider within the purview of support to any of the centers, anybody who's engaging with the center. So does that help? That probably doesn't help bound it. It probably expands the boundaries.
Is knowledge tech, this is Ed, is knowledge technology the same as knowledge engineering?
That's a good question. I would almost put knowledge engineering, I think I'd spread knowledge engineering across knowledge architecture and knowledge technology. Because as we're moving forward, and I think as you'll see in Mill's poster, knowledge is no longer constrained by applications of technology. As we move forward into the semantic grid, it becomes an entity of itself. So it floats, it moves with its own properties, etc. So I would, and knowledge, maybe knowledge engineering and representation would put sort of in the center there, because engineering, you have to understand how people learn, something about intellectual capital. So,
Denise,
this is Kate. I think this is in here, but I love doing that translation back and forth. As you know, I also run a program that's sort of a sister of yours. Where do you put the facilitation or the integration of tacit knowledge? Do you think about that around the organization piece? You've got that's
intellectual capital management. In that we include, intellectual capital assets, knowledge elicitation, expertise management. Yeah.
Okay. It's something that the language is a little different, because when I think about intellectual capital, I think about codified as opposed to personalized. And then the
codified and the is actually seems to fall within the purview of knowledge asset management, the traditional. If you look at Andreessen's model, it's more over in the structural capital. But anyway, Edwin, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Do you see this nested? What I see is a superior element that this all nests within, and that being the knowledge ecosystem. Therefore, all these elements of this competency wheel build the capacity of a sustainable knowledge resource.
Exactly. Yes, yes. And the knowledge ecosystem, whether it's a neighborhood, a household, a city, a group within an organization, absolutely. I think that's the core element of a knowledge economy.
This is Sandra. There's something that I think Kate mentioned about, or maybe I just keyed in on the word personal, dealing with personalization of the knowledge. I don't know where it falls in with these different pieces, but the idea that, you've got all these, whether it's knowledge management assets or you've got the sort of the community knowledge, how do you get that to the person who needs it, so to speak, when they've got one particular focus, that personalization of knowledge?
Right.
And the definition of personalization is awkward because some people use it as in we bring people to people. So, like, I want to talk to you, so that's personalization. But when I build a website, I talk about personalization as in driving to you, that's what's most relevant. So apologies to you all because I know it's been misused, the term.
Well, I think there are multiple legitimate uses of the term. So I wouldn't say that one is correct and one is not correct. But I think the reason that we put together the competency wheel is because we think that if you're practicing in the field of KM, you need to have a base, a foundation in each one of these areas. But you also may decide to specialize in one or the other. But when you're actually going out and solving problems or identifying problems, you're going to draw from all of these different competency areas. So if you're developing that, the network, the personal network, the organizational network, the knowledge network, you're actually looking at things like communities and collaboration. Okay, but you're probably using your knowledge of technology. You're also going to have to use your knowledge of architecture, and if you're trying to create those knowledge networks, you have to understand a little bit about intellectual capital. Yeah, it's not a clean field. It's essentially, what we've been saying is that the Masters in Business Administration in the 21st century will be replaced by a Masters in Knowledge Management because we're not managing finances. Financial management is not all that we're doing anymore. We're managing we're essentially managing knowledge and intellectual capital. That's the primary asset in the 21st century. So it's not easily constrained or defined, which makes a lot of people in the academic environment very uncomfortable because they like to have nicely defined programs. So.
Denise, this is Kate as well. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Richard.
One thing that I think would be helpful in even defining who the stakeholders are is to put down in layman's words what we are trying to do. What services or capabilities are we trying to provide? And in something that's readable by, somebody in high school. I mean, that's one of the stakeholders, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that was our primary topic to discuss this week, but the issue of stakeholders and understanding the community came up and I thought needed to be addressed. So can we define what that is, Richard, without asking the question you posed last week, or should we go ahead and try to define what those things, those products and services, outcomes and outputs around those 10 competencies, what they are?
I view it as an iterative process, and for a couple of reasons. One is I think as you define one, you'll clarify the others. Like we were looking at the stakeholders, and while we were bringing out a lot of good points, we were going around in circles a little bit, I thought. Mm-hmm. And the reason I thought we were going in circles is because we didn't have a clear definition of what we're trying to do in terms of services. So as we say, maybe pick a series of services and then cross-reference them to the stakeholders, I think that'll really help build both of them.
Sure.
Yeah. So if we had to pick 5 things that we were going to support in the first year, what would they be? I would say one is engaging with the technology community to provide at least a space where they can talk to potential business users and where they can bring products and services, because I think that's something concrete we can do in the center, and I think it would have immediate value.
I would say, this is Sandra, I would say that idea you had of the global collaboration, bringing, your academy peers and industry peers together in this network would help tremendously.
Okay.
I would add that the only thing that I have not heard so far, and I missed last week's or the last session, is that I've not heard or seen an element that represents our internal mechanisms. So we have to consider ourselves as our own stakeholder, the personnel and associations that we have internally to represent what this center will do. And I think if we have ourselves at the table to make sure we service ourselves internally, to make sure everything external is, as well as can be constructed, would be important.
Yeah. How are we going to function, right? Well, Miriam and Ed, you both had concrete suggestions too. And I know Miriam doesn't have a microphone, but I thought that those were good projects that maybe needed, that didn't have a current home, but maybe supporting communities that practice spaces for projects that may not have a profit angle right now, or maybe never, but just it served a real purpose.
Did I miss a question?
Oh, I was probably rambling and didn't pose it up. I do that a lot.
This is Kate. I was really resonating with Richard, Richard, who really said, let's talk about in plain terms what we're doing. And did you guys do that last time? So I'm sorry, I don't want to drag anybody back.
Well, last week we had talked about 5 pillars of activities that the center might focus on. We talked about learning and teaching, things like webinars and seminars, open and free, skills building workshops, perhaps for the labor force, supporting opportunities for faculty in academia or teachers in the public schools, etc., to learn about KM, supporting student learning, new course development, industry, academia, collaboration, advising and consulting. Pardon me, we had identified some possible efforts there. Advocacy, standards development, semantic technology development, semantic practice teams. We have R&D. There may be some topics that, we have some researchers around the world, but we do not have a lot of journals, peer-reviewed journals in the field. And many of the people who are researching or teaching in this area communicate through conferences. There is a different model there. So how is it that we identify the R&D needs in the field or amongst the people who are participating in in any center? Can we support visiting scholars for periods of time? It doesn't mean that you move. It just means that for 6 months you have some, support and affiliation virtual with the center. So if you want to assist in research. And then just the outreach and partnerships, social networking, targeted problem solving, student projects, convening community groups. We have several Habitats for Humanity in Ohio. And right now with the housing crisis, I'm wondering whether or not there's something we couldn't do for Habitat for Humanity, just in terms of showing them how to use the social networking capabilities to link.
Great idea.
Denise, Edwin. So
Yes.
It sounds like we may actually get into doing some consulting work.
Well, I would prefer to simply connect consultants and clients. I don't want the center to be involved, per se, in consulting, because that moves us out of the academic and the open sphere into what should be the business environment.
So is there going to be a fine line between advising and consulting?
I think that's a good point. And when we get to the point of talking about what do the intellectual property models look like, we have to be really cautious there. Yeah.
And that leads me to a second question that I don't know may have been covered in the first volley, but where is our source of resources coming from?
I think that's next week. Yeah, all of these questions are very much interconnected. For some types of products and services, I would almost like to have something like the social financing approach. We have people interested in this. What are you willing to contribute to enable us to support you on it? What I don't want this center to become is an institute where people join for $20,000 annual membership, because that doesn't serve moving KM into the community.
Yeah.
It excludes a whole lot of people.
Yeah. This is Ed. I'm wondering if we should just concentrate on the learning and teaching pillar and then grow from there.
I think that's a great idea. Maybe just pick one pillar and see what it looks like. Yeah.
Well, learning and teaching would be the most useful based on what you said a couple minutes ago, about how you want to educate people and, to even, know what knowledge management is and, what services you hope to provide in the next several years. You know what I mean?
Yes, and if we can go back to Mary's suggestion for last week, and Mary, forgive me if I'm not attributing this correctly, but I think the learning and teaching, we want to approach who knows how to do this out there and is willing to teach it.
Yeah.
I don't think the academy can provide answers to all of those, because in too many cases, the academy needs to learn from the practitioners.
Is there a MOOC on knowledge management?
No, and we really need one.
Maybe that should be the goal. Establish a MOOC.
Oops.
Let's
put that on the list.
It would fall under learning and teaching, or you have new course development. But I was just wondering if there's any I could learn from right now.
But I think what you're suggesting, Ed, is a new delivery channel.
Yeah.
Because what I'm thinking of in terms of new course development, for example, Edwin and I have been talking about creating a course in Indigenous knowledge, because I think there's so much we can learn from that environment, especially as our economic environment is morphing. So how do we look back at some of that Indigenous knowledge that, we all have discarded because we're in such a nice, well-structured, well-managed economy that we don't have to think about that anymore. So I would say, in that case, I would put out an idea to the center participants to say, who knows about this and who would like to participate in designing such a course?
Well, I like Ed's idea about tackling learning and teaching as a phase one of the build out of the organization, because that'll give us the structure and architecture and trials and tribulations needed to figure out how to build the internal architecture correctly, or at least work the bugs out before we start tackling a whole big wide circle.
Exactly.
I would agree. This is Kate speaking. I would also, just Denise, to echo what you said, given that this slide will probably be shared with lots of our friends, is under advocacy, knowledge management standards, why don't you say knowledge management standards, encouragement with AIM or something? So we're going to hand the baton to AIM. I think that's what you're saying, but we're going to encourage them or make ourselves available because we have the experience or something.
I'm hoping that we can, yes. So how this would actually play out, is the center, any center, might end up being a source of training for people who want to gain certification in KM.
Mm-hmm.
We can offer the courses open in a MOOC, right, et cetera, but the testing, who does the testing and the actual, review of the submissions? That could be a lot of different private companies. It could be centers if they wanted to take that on, but yeah, we could be an implementer of standards. Absolutely. Let me write that down. Oops, sorry. I think that each time I try
So
to
in that discussion, then, Denise, you're saying AIM would be the certificate provider?
Yes. Now, if the way AIM does this, and what's great about working with an established organization in the standards arena, is they know how to set up the standards. They would maintain records. They would certify organizations to do the testing, and then they would provide testing information. There are people who are going to be at Habitat for Humanity who want to gain credentials in KM. They're not going to all come to a graduate program in knowledge management to get those credentials. So they might go to KM Institute. Maybe they want to be level 1 in one of those areas. So AIM would coordinate who's doing the training, who's approved to do the testing, and then they would keep all the records as well.
Okay. So the Knowledge Sciences Center will be the provider of free education and training, and it will be targeted to the stakeholders that we're identifying or trying to identify to have KM catered to that domain they work in?
Mm-hmm.
Could be. That would be a great idea, I think. Yeah. Great suggestion, Kate.
Mm-hmm.
Should we also possibly piggyback on some of the infrastructure that PMI has? My good friend Ed Hoffman is on their board. Ed is the CKO for NASA, and he might be able to help us get connected and leverage some of the capacity they have.
Well, the model of PMI and also the model for, I think it's ABPMP. These are the models that we would be building on, but we want AIM to do the actual standards promotion. The reason is because AIM also is highly regarded in the international environment. So it's a national standards body. But if we establish standards with AIM, they will help us to promote it to other organizations and then take it to the ISO level.
That sounds good.
So watch for that call for participation, because we're setting up 4 different committees, and we really want broad participation because that leads to adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I think even those of us who have been working in the field for 20 years or have advanced degrees cannot say that we're credentialed in KM. So I've taken every certification course that's out there, but they don't have any recognized value. Those who are in master's programs or PhD programs now are probably ahead of the rest of us. So I like this suggestion.
So where does that, this is Sandra, where does that leave us on the other pillars? I'm not sure if we're focusing on a vertical splice or if we're going to take some pieces of the other pillars. No?
I think what I'm hearing, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of taking one pillar and moving it forward for like real build out, we would focus on learning and teaching. However, we're still going to pick up the global expert team, the work with the technology users and developers, and look at, in general, setting up like sort of rentable, leasable spaces for communities of practice. I don't mean leasable in terms of money, but I want to support this community of practice. Can you give me space to do that? So that's what I have on my list. Does that sound like what everybody was saying? Did I miss something?
Agreed.
Richard, I have maybe just a little bit of a counter proposal. Instead of just launching with learning and teaching, because it seems to be a good choice, maybe we could have a little bit more structured way of doing that. And I'd propose three things. One is to go through the items that we have and reword those in terms of action words. So instead of like a noun or like say under learning and teaching where we have virtual and on-site institutes, I'd say maybe we could write a sentence that, you know, students or teachers would perform this function for somebody for a certain customer.
Right.
So it's a little clearer what we're doing. And then once we did that for the items we have here, is to develop some like simple metrics. I'm not saying to really beat this to death, but a couple key metrics on what makes them something we would want to pick to start out with. Like, is the capability already out there, easily to get? You know, is a university even legally allowed to do it? You know, just a couple sort of on-off, easy to evaluate. And then maybe the third one is, what are the key needs? You know, does it meet a key need? And if so, can we write that key need down? You know, like we as the institute should be doing this because, and then fill in that part of the sentence.
This is Kate. I want to say amen to that. I wrote this in the chat. If there's any way we could even take our stakeholders and say they're looking for revenue or productivity, innovation, profitability, societal impact, something like that.
Richard, I really like that approach. Yeah. So, how about if I think Jake, I'll ask Jake if he'll upload the slides to, do we have a wiki? Yeah.
I don't think we have a wiki. I think we just have the website.
We have the website. Okay.
You could load it up the link then, the group.
That's right. I think that we may need a wiki to support this because we're getting a lot more feedback than I had anticipated through the webinar. So we maybe need a working space. Let's see if we can, let's create a wiki that is announced to the LinkedIn group and also accessible from the website.
Hey, Denise, I got a question.
Go ahead, Evan.
In your action plan as far as where we are and where we're going, how much of this work will be done at the on-sites coming up, and how are you going to divide with the two geographical representations of who's doing what?
That's a really good question, and I think I'm going to have to go off with a cup of tea or a glass of sherry and think about that. But no, that's the main question. I think I like Richard's idea of building out the 5 pillar items with these 3 actions, because I really think that gives, I'd like to have that done before we have either of the on-site events. And I'd almost like to distribute that to anybody who's coming, because I think that helps to focus what we're really saying the center is doing. I think the persona we're probably going to have to do is task 1. We might have some templates, but I think that's a task of the groups. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, the only other question I'll say right here is, seeing as this is the jump point for all this activity, the slide we're looking at right now, this is actually the KSC's 5 operational pillars. Is that what I'm hearing? That's what these are supposed to represent?
And these are just my ideas.
Okay, so I think your best first step is that everybody agree or change just the headings of the pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please. And, and vote whether one should stay in or not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think we have to have something that represents internal operations as a pillar.
Okay.
So self-education, perpetuating.
Yeah.
This is Kate again. Is there any possibility that when we do that, Richard, I hope I'm getting the terminology close, some kind of benefits analysis for our stakeholders, that we might get a surprise that the largest stakeholder, the most likely stakeholder to plunge in at the beginning, is interested in something other than the first pillar? In other words, if we do that benefits analysis, is there a possibility that they, in fact, are really interested in R&D, or they, in fact, need our help with advocacy, because there's a lot of stuff that could be I'm making this up, but I just want to make sure that we jump into learning and teaching, even though that's one of my favorite topics in the world. So we jump into it with our eyes open, because we believe that our stakeholders are there at our side.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying, Kate. This is Denise. I think what we were suggesting as a result of Edwin's comment is that we build this all out first, and then we make it available to people so that they can essentially tell us what they're interested in and what makes us, what has the greatest value to them. Yes.
Great, thank you. And I still appreciate, I have to leave to meet with a student, so I'll talk to you guys all later.
Great. Thanks, Kate, for joining and for sharing some great ideas.
Thank you. I'm with you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, let me just ask, everybody had a chance to speak, either in chat or...
What was the question?
Has everybody who's on had a chance to voice their opinion?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And remember, there's the LinkedIn group, so you don't have to say something today. You can say something during the week. So it looks like we have some work to do this week.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll create the wiki and we'll let you know
Okay.
how to access it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Denise.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.